right, we're going to pick up where we left off. We're still in part 2, so we're talking about texture in this case. And texture is either going to be real or illusionary. If you are standing in front of a sculpture, you're looking at real texture. So think about being in front of a chair and the material it's covered with. You can often see a texture to it, you touch it, you feel it, it's real. When you have a painting, a photograph, a different form of printmaking, we as artists will create the illusion of texture through mark making. So it's illusionary, but it's something that's visual, that we're trying to communicate, but isn't physically there, like you see, in a photograph. So an example I use quite a bit is think about a piece of sandpaper versus a photograph of sandpaper. You look at both, you can see the roughness of the texture, you can feel it when you touch the real piece of sandpaper, but the smoothness of the paper of the photograph, you can't feel any roughness to it. So the texture there is illusionary. It appears rough, but it doesn't feel rough. And then space, we have 3 different examples. So in the upper image here with Mickey Mouse by Warhol, we have what's considered flat or no space. So if you were to project yourself into that image, you're right flat up there against Mickey Mouse. There's really no other place you can go. The background being one solid color doesn't communicate that there's a sense of space or depth or that Mickey Mouse is in an actual environment. So that would be considered flat space. The image here by Van Gogh is considered shallow because we can see a layering. The artist is in front. Here is in front of the easel, which is in front of the wall, which has a poster on it, which, there's a door off to the side. So you have a layering of things that you can recognize. So it gives us a sense of space, of the artist being in a room. But, again, if you were to project yourself into that image, it would be tight. There's not a lot of room to kind of navigate through. Versus the landscape in the lower right, which gives us what we refer to as deep space. You have the figure here, and then the mountain ranges. So you have a layering of objects, in this case, land. But there's a sense that, they can really roam around and go deep into this image. So when you're looking at an image, space can help to indicate some things too, in terms of interpretation of the story as well. All right, so that leads to the third step, which is interpretation. You're taking all of the things that you listed in 1A or B and in 2. So when we were going through the analysis part, we were also doing some interpretation. So it's really important that when you do this, you keep those two things separate. So, for example, looking at the image of the woman that had been pointing and directing other people, when we're speaking to the idea of size relationships, you're just saying that the central figure appears much larger than the other figures. The central figure is on the same ground level as the other figures. The central figure is pointing in a direction, drawing our eye off to the side. So you're making observations, but not going in depth into, well, where is she directing these people? Where are we meant to be going? In terms of that comes in interpretation afterward. All right, so what I'd like you to do is basically apply the Feldman method to this particular image. A couple of things I want you to think about are what time of day is it and why do you feel that way? What visual clues back it up? What's significant about 3 chairs and 2 people? Look to color. Is it used in a natural, somewhat natural, symbolic way? And what other things you can piece together and then tell me the story that information kind of comes or brings to you. based on all the descriptive aspects that you do in number 1, and then the listing of some of the analysis stuff in part 2. Excuse me. So pause, do that, and then when you're ready, come back and I'll break down the image. Okay, so when you're looking at this image, we've got, let's just start with the basics. In terms of space, we have a sense of deep space, right? You've got the chairs and the people closest to you. You've got chairs in the middle ground. You've got the trees kind of coming off deep into the background. There's a layering of those objects, of the tree trunks, of people to chairs, and so on. So that helps to define that sense of perspective or deep space. Look to the color. Color, it's fairly realistic, but there might be something a little bit more. One side of the tree line is a little more bluish than we might normally see, in the natural world. The grass in the lawn might be a little more yellowy than we typically would think of in terms of grass. But in general, the colors seem to be fairly realistic. So, we're looking at 2 people in a park, and let's go from there. All right, so we have 3 chairs and 2 people. Do these people know each other? Well, yeah, they do. They're very calmly, kind of sitting next to each other. They're relaxed. You can tell by their, kind of body posture that there's no sense of tension there. We also have their feet, legs crossed towards one another. That's kind of atypical if you are in the situation that you see here. So you have 3 chairs, one of which is empty. If these 2 people didn't know each other, they would probably keep a chair in between them, just to give them the option of not interacting necessarily with the other person. However, they're sitting side by side. They're also crossing their legs towards each other, which means they're very comfortable with contact, accidental contact in between them. And they have a very relaxed kind of posture about them. So what does that empty chair represent? Well, could be a number of things. It could be the idea of waiting for a person to, another friend to show up and hang out with them, or the fact that somebody maybe just physically left and they're left alone. It could be more symbolic rather than realistic, the idea that maybe we're looking at a couple and that they are thinking of a family, and this could represent that possibility of a child or children coming into their relationship. It could also represent somebody that they lost, a friend, a child, an uncle, a parent that recently passed away. So that presence of the individual is still with you, but their physical form isn't. So it could be represented through an empty chair. However, I'm going to say that it's more indicative of the idea that these 2 are in a relationship together, and that this whole image is speaking to the idea of these 2 people being in a relationship together and moving forward in a common path, or on a common path. So if you look at the chairs a little bit more closely, what you'll see is that the back of this chair, placed on top of the back of this one, creates this. So the idea that you have 2 distinct individuals that are known by their own names, their own personalities, their own lives, are coming together in a relationship. And as a couple, they have a third kind of identity that comes into play. It's not a physical thing, because 2 people don't meld together into, or morph together into a hybrid of the 2. It's an identity that they have, as being a couple. So you have, Peter and Mary as individuals, but then Peter and Mary as a couple. So that chair can simply represent the idea of the two being in a relationship together. The other thing is looking towards nature. We have the tree line here on the left-hand side being very similar to coloration in the t-shirt of this person and how the vest is being depicted in terms of the darker brown with a little bit of the lighter shading. And then on this side, it's more, kind of tying in the jacket of this person to how the tree trunk is kind of rendered there. And then on top of that, there's a little bit more brown kind of added into the tree line on that particular side. So although there's not green that's being pulled in that we can visually see on the figure on the right, we've got more of the brown coming up into the trees to tie that person to that side. So the two tree banks then represent the two individuals, and the idea that they are on a common path together as a couple, common goals, moving into the future, is expressed through the direction of the tree lines and how they move off into the distance, into the future. Both figures are looking square on into the future, but as you can see, the two tree lines never quite come together. Again, representing individuals and how they can't physically morph into, a couple as a, kind of a third person here. So it's still showing that there's individuality there, but that they're on the common path together at this point in their lives. Okay, good. So now you have the basis of how to kind of use the Feldman method when you look at a work of art. And what I would like you to do now is to use that with your final assignment. So you're going to start by looking at the picture that I provide, and without researching it, you're going to apply the Feldman method to it. So you're going to give me all the descriptions of what you see within the image. You're going to break down color and shape and space and all those things as well. And then you're going to try to communicate what that story is, what is being told to us. And I will probably give you a couple extra questions to think about in terms of the storyline. And then you will research and provide me with information about the artist and about the actual painting that you'd be looking at. Provide me with your resources, and then continue on with the other questions of the assignment. And then submit that through the SafeLink, SafeAssign link that I provided you in the same folder.